Though this is not necessarily part of the menu management system, as you might have noticed, we do need some kind of screen graphic to help transition the different parts of the game, rather than switching screens super abruptly. Before we get into saving and loading data just yet, let's take a little bit of time to create a splash screen to help start the application. And here we'll show a game or company logo with some text, and then fade into the main menu. This is a little bit nicer than just thrusting you straight into the main menu immediately when you start the game. And note, although the splash screen is a UI canvas, we're going to structure it so that it actually lives outside of our menu system. And this is mostly something that just disguises the load time of the application. It's not officially a menu screen. Being able to fade a screen element is useful unto itself. So let's focus first on creating a separate ScreenFader component before we get into any splash screen specific stuff. Let's start by laying out some kind of screen graphic that we're going to apply the ScreenFader to. So let's create a UI that covers the whole game view and start with a new UI canvas. As with our menus, we want to modify the canvas scaler component, set the UI scale mode to scale with screen size, and then set the reference resolution to 1280 by 720 in my case. And you should plug in whatever values you're using for your final target build here, of course. Create a new image on the canvas, UI image, and then stretch anchor the rect transform so it fills the whole screen. So just alt-click this icon here, and everything fills up with white. This image will be our background, so let's name it background. And let's color it black. You can decorate your splash screen any way that you want, but I'm just going to go for a basic icon with some text below it. So let's create some UI text first. UI text. Adjust the font size to something large like 50. And you can use the dim bold alternate font or whatever you want. Center the alignment and adjust the overflow settings to overflow and overflow. Otherwise, just resize the rect transform so it's large enough to display your text. Color the text white so we can actually see it. And then let's change the string to read loading or something like that. This is just a placeholder for now. I'll shift the text down about 100 units in Y. And let's rename our objects in the hierarchy just to stay organized. This one is splash screen, and our text object should be splash screen text. Add an image on top of the background, and I'll resize it to 250 by 250. And I'll shift it upward 100 pixels while keeping its rect transform still anchored to the center. You can modify the image to use your own logo or icon in here. Assets, import new asset. I have a menu icon round 256.png in the resources. You can use that or use your own sprite. And let me import that into the sample game textures. In the import settings, make sure that the texture type is set to sprite, 2D, and UI, and then adjust the pixels per unit to about 256 since our image is 256 pixels square. Hit apply. And let's rename our image object to splash screen image. And change the source image to use our new sprite. Just drag it in there. And here is your basic splash screen layout. Again, usually this is a great place to show your company logo or moniker as the game loads. In the level management folder of the project window, let's create a subfolder in the scripts folder called utilities. Again, we're just trying to be organized. And inside of here, let's make a new C# script called ScreenFader. Go ahead and edit the ScreenFader script. And let's clear out the body of the ScreenFader class. This one doesn't necessarily need to be part of the level management namespace, since it's a general purpose utility. And we'll just declare some fields at the top to control the fade. Each one will be a private float. make sure that you mark the private class variables with the serialize field attribute so that it can show up in the inspector. The first one will be a float called solid alpha. That represents the alpha value of a solid color, so let's default that to 1 or fully opaque. We'll also need a class variable for our clear alpha value. Serialize field attribute, private float, clear alpha, and this time we default to 0 for completely transparent. And let's declare one more float called fade duration. This represents how long we want the fade to take. Private float, fade duration, and let's try a default value of 2 seconds. We want to apply our screen fader to a variety of UI elements, so we'll need a using Unity engine.ui line at the top to give us quick access to those components. And then we can declare a private array of maskable graphics, and we'll call that graphics to fade. This will be our list of UI text or images that we want to fade. Maskable graphic is just the base class for both of those UI elements. Now, having this array of graphics to fade will allow us to fade a number of elements all at once instead of needing to apply a separate screen fader component to each one. But having an array of stuff to process means we probably should make some simple methods to set them up. So let's first make a method called setAlpha, private void setAlpha. And this one will take a float, we'll just call that alpha. We'll use this to loop through our array and then just set them all to use the same alpha value. This will initialize our graphics before the fade to make sure that they all start at the correct level of transparency. So just use a for each to loop through each maskable graphic in graphics to fade. If the graphic is not null, we're just going to drill down into the graphics canvas renderer component. Each text or UI element should have a canvas renderer. And that already has a nice method called setAlpha on it. We just pass in the alpha value that we want in there, and then it'll take care of setting the colors alpha channel. So now we have an easy way to change all of the UI elements to either fully opaque or transparent to start the fade. The fade process itself is very similar. We just make a private fade method that returns nothing. And this time we pass in a float target alpha for our final transparency level, and a float duration for how long we want the fade to take. And once again, we just loop through all of the maskable graphics. For each maskable graphic in graphics to fade, if each one is not null, then graphic crossfade alpha. Again, we already have this built-in method from Unity, and we just pass in our target alpha value, our duration, and we also pass in a Boolean value true. This just indicates whether the fade is active even if the game is paused and our timescale is 0. So we can always just set that to true. We have two private methods that basically can make our elements fade on and off. To expose this functionality to outside objects, we'll make a couple of short public methods. And our first public method will fade the graphics off. Public void fade off. And this one just needs to make sure that all of the UI elements start with a solid alpha value. So set alpha, solid alpha. And then we invoke fade, passing in our clear alpha value and our fade duration to control the timing. And really that's it. This will fade off our graphics from solid to transparent. Likewise, we can declare a public void fade on to fade the graphics the other direction. This time we set alpha to the clear value to start it transparent. And then we invoke fade with the solid alpha as the target value and fade duration to control the timing. And that's all we need to fade the elements on or off. Now we'll normally trigger this from an external object, but if you want to test it, we can bring back the start method. So I'll add a private void start, and let's just fade our elements off to start. Fade off. And then back in Unity, on our splash screen object, let's drag in our ScreenFader component. Then make sure that you dial the graphics to fade size to 3. And then we'll drag in our background image, our splash screen text, and our splash screen image for our icon. Press play. And now you have a slightly more pleasant way to start the application. Just throw up your game or company logo on the splash screen, and now we fade into the main menu nicely. I probably don't want this to run automatically, so let's just get rid of that start method. That was just for testing. And we can save the script, and our ScreenFader component should be complete. And actually, in Unity, we might not want to leave the splash screen object in the main menu scene, so let's drag that into our project window and save it as a prefab. Now you can, of course, reuse this ScreenFader component for a variety of situations. It's fairly generic, so feel free to repurpose that script however you want. Anytime you need to fade some text or images in or out, you can just invoke the ScreenFader's fade off or fade on methods. Now in this case, we want to make a separate splash screen component to control the fading in and out. So let's take a look at that in the next episode.